Gordon, welcome to CFO at Home. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much, Vince. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, I understand that your business focuses on helping clients with financial planning, specifically for life transitions. And when we say transitions, particularly those that aren't necessarily going according to plan, that can be an unexpected career change, a health challenge, maybe a retirement decision. But I also understand that you personally have lived through quite a few transitions, business transition, as well as cancer and even cardiac arrest. How did these experiences reshape your understanding of what financial planning is really for?
Yeah, so I have been through a lot of trials and tribulations in my life, both personally as well as, health conditions, as well as dealing with various career changes. And it really helps to experience life because life does hit us sideways sometimes. It's hard to expect certain things. And for example, when I was in my early 30s and I had two boys who were young at the time, my wife and I had two sons that were 2 and 4 at the time. And I was in great health. I was diagnosed with an advanced stage cancer, and it just came out of nowhere. I'd never really been sick before, always in great health. And when that happens, it comes out of nowhere. And then dealing with that is not only just an emotional and a health concern, but it's also a financial concern. So I saw firsthand how that can throw everything into array, into just issues as far as dealing with paying for the care, making sure that our medical insurance is organized and that we understand how everything is going to be organized moving forward, having less income, making sure that I have some sort of disability insurance, caring for our little ones, and really understanding that it takes a village. So I had that issue in my early 30s. And then during COVID, I did go into cardiac arrest as well. And then dealing with that issue after the fact, again, the same sort of things on just recovering and coming back to health, but also dealing with the immense issues that surround it. And I find that usually also translates to a lot of clients that we deal with, not always so serious as far as a life-threatening illness, but quite often when people are taking a look at their financial plans, it's because a loved one is sick. Perhaps their parent is getting older or forgetful and they've never planned before, or there is some sort of pain point like their children are growing up or going to college, or there is a health condition or a health issue. Usually when everything is fine, people will do what's in the textbook and prepare for it, but not necessarily as urgently as when a crisis comes up.
So, you were a financial planner even before you experienced, particularly your health concerns, correct?
Oh, no, actually, yeah, let's take a step back. So
Okay.
I have been through a few careers over the ages. I originally went to Columbia, New York City, and I majored in mechanical engineering. So I have a engineering background, and that's come in handy with finance and really crafting plans. I always wanted to have a toy company. So 15 years out of school, after I graduated, I worked in engineering for 15 years in the tech world and aerospace. And then I started my own toy company. So I ran my toy company for about 15 years. And so I was able to experience all the, again, trials and tribulations of running my own business and starting things from scratch and designing and importing from overseas. There was just a lot of plates in the air, lots to juggle. And so I learned about small businesses from that. And I did that for 15 years and just really, it was a passion of mine. But 15 years in, the writing was on the wall. Toys R Us went out of business. Kids were starting to play with iPads before they could walk. So I had created this great toy company that was making a lot of kids laugh and bringing joy to parents and people. And I really enjoyed it. But it was time to shift. So I decided to join the world of finance, which is something that I always enjoyed as well. And I started my own advisory firm because I did have an entrepreneurial spirit. So I did that. And then I did that for a couple of years. And then COVID hit. So, as I'm sure everybody listening has had issues during COVID as well, there were a lot of transitions. At that time, it wasn't a really great time to be starting any type of business. So, at that point, I decided to get a job where I could work from home because early on during COVID, not everybody was working from home, and there were some jobs that were special to that. So I got a job working for Ernst and Young, and it was in financial planning, which I really knew very little about financial planning or what it was, that there even was a career. And that position was working from home on a phone line, talking with state employees from Florida. And we were talking with everybody from crossing guards to teachers to firefighters, police officers, all the way up to elected officials in the state of Florida about their finance, about their retirement plan. They have a pension plan. So there's a lot of complexity that people didn't realize again until the points hit and they got close to retirement. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh no, I got to figure out what's going on. So they would call us up and we would walk them through and just speaking with all these different very diverse people who came with different education levels and backgrounds and understanding of finance. I had these conversations with them at their level. I met them where they were and I fell in love with financial planning at that point. The cardiac arrest came soon after, and we can get a little further into that, but it came soon after and I survived that, and then there was just a long rehabilitation. But when I started coming back and rehabilitating, I always feel like there's something good to have on the horizon, something to work towards. And when I'm in horrible shape and my body can't walk up a flight of stairs, and a week after my heart attack, I signed up for the CFP exam. So that's the Certified Financial Planning exam. It's usually about a year worth of intense study, taking a whole bunch of courses and everything from financial planning to college planning, education. We're talking about retirement planning, estate planning, taxation. So it's very rigorous. I put that a year ahead of me. And then a year later, I took the exam and I passed it. But it was something to look forward to, getting better physically as well as educating myself, and something to look forward to. So that's how I got into financial planning. And then after a year or so, then I came back and I'm now working with Prudential Advisors in my own advisory firm. So that's the journey that I took.
So it all came together at one time, right? As you were really getting into financial planning and you were having people reach out to you at these crossroads in their life that was causing them financial questions, you were going through a crossroads yourself. So it all came together there. So that whole concept of these crossroads that really change the way that we think about our financial planning. I guess it's good in a sense that these crossroads trigger these thoughts, hopefully in time to make corrections and to do something about it. But these crossroads it can be some of those stressful times in our lives as well. And ideally, making financial decisions maybe when you're under the stress of a health issue or you just lost a job, whatever it is, that I would imagine could be a challenge. What do you have to say to people who may be going to those transitions, and how throughout all of that they can make thoughtful decisions? What can you walk through a process for people who may be in those situations?
Yeah, and obviously the best time to plant a tree was 5, 10 years ago, right? So the best time to plan is now if you're in good health, and to buy life insurance when you're healthy because it's going to be less expensive. But sometimes that doesn't happen, right? Sometimes we find ourselves in situations where we just have to react instead of be proactive. And in those cases, it depends on the situation. Just like every financial plan is, it's like a fingerprint. It's very unique because on paper, two people could be the exact same age, the same gender, in the same neighborhood, but have different goals or have different spouses or family situations. It really comes down to goals, wants, where you are, what your resources are. But if you're found in a situation, a health crisis, for example, the most critical thing is gathering a team to support you. So whether that is a financial planner, a financial advisor, obviously a spouse, a loved one, a sibling, a parent, somebody that can help organize everything. It's really critical. Health, again, specifically, because it's so complex. Hopefully, you have good insurance, right? We'll start there. And luckily, I did during both of my conditions. I was gainfully employed, so the employer had excellent insurance. But then everything just gets complicated. And obviously, if you're not in great health, then mentally too, it's very difficult to stay on top of things, on top of the bills. And it's really important to have a team of, again, friends or loved ones to come to the appointments with you so that they can be a second set of ears to understand what the doctors are saying, to review all the medical bills before you go ahead and pay it, because sometimes there are mistakes. Quite often, mistakes are made. So, not to rush to help organize things. And if you can afford it, you can hire a professional to do that as well. But to take stock, to take a moment to take stock and not to react in any crisis is of utmost importance. And to have that support system really allows you to do that. So to take just accountability of what you have, understand if you have disability insurance through your employer, how do you utilize that? Sometimes you need long term care. Sometimes there are government or state agencies that will be able to help, or even nonprofits. So, really understanding your next move is important. And then, as far as the changes moving forward in my specific situation, I realized that it was important for me just to continue learning. For example, after my heart condition, I decided didn't want to be a stock trader, so I learned about financial planning. So moving forward, it's important to understand what you want to do moving forward and set a goal, right? So when you do recover, hopefully, you're able to gather everything together. But it also depends on, let's say, if you have a family, if you have a young family, which I did at the time, having all of the papers is really important, your legal documents. So having a will, if something were to happen to you and your spouse, so who would take care of your kids? A living will, if something were to happen and you were on life support, did you want to stay on life support or not? Making sure that all your beneficiaries are in good shape. That's critical as well. Some people don't realize that. So there's a lot of organization that you need to do first in a crisis. And then once you have a little bit of breathing room, then you can do the more long term planning.
So it sounds like in your specific case, you had a lot of you had the life insurance. You did you have an estate plan? Did you have all those things lined up?
Yeah, good question. So first time around, I was again in my 30s. I was young, I was healthy, and all of a sudden getting cancer. In fact, it took me a long time to get diagnosed because I felt something was wrong, but I thought it would pass, right? So a lot of us in our 20s and 30s just think that we're immortal. That and even I had children, and it I had made a mistake as far as I did not have life insurance at the time. I had life insurance through my employer. That's just a basic life insurance policy, but not very much. But I did not have enough. And then again, once that happens, once you have a cancer diagnosis, insurance company is not going to insure you. So I had to wait a few years after my cancer diagnosis to actually get life insurance. But luckily, I got to the point after intensive chemo where I did recover fully. And after a few years, I was able to get life insurance at that point. But it was a mistake that I didn't have the first time around. We all learn from our mistakes, and I'm hoping some of your listeners can learn from my mistakes. And now, in a place where I realized that that was something that I had children, it was really something that should have been taken care of right away when we had children, just to make sure that if I didn't make it, that they could go to college, that they'd be able to get through 18 or 20 until they were independent and on their own. So as soon as I was able to after that get life insurance, I did, which was a great thing because when I had my cardiac arrest, I did have life insurance. And the truth of the matter is that was one of the few things while I was lying there on my deathbed, I would say. I had just come back from cardiac arrest. They were able to resuscitate me, but they hadn't opened up my arteries yet. So I still could have very easily not have made it during that time. And I was thinking about how proud I was of my boys who had grown up and were independent at this point. I had lived such a wonderful life with my wife. And I really thought about how grateful I was that I had life insurance. That was really honestly one of the few things I was thinking about as I was lying there in the hospital. It was important.
Yeah, I read these things all the time about maybe people, if they are terminally ill, the things that become important to you at that point, and all of a sudden, it's usually not the things that you spend a great deal of your life chasing. It's interesting that And usually it's, oh, I wish I hadn't spent as much time working and that kind of thing. But that very practical thing of, man, I wish I had life insurance, I can see that being a part of that. I guess I never thought about it that way. Was that, in looking back, was that the biggest, when you went through your first incident, the biggest oh crap you had, or were there other holes in your plan that in retrospect you wish you had taken care of?
Yeah, that was the big one. Luckily, when our boys were born, we did set up our will and estate plan. So that was all in place. Although that is something that, of course, you can do once you have a cancer diagnosis, getting life insurance. You can't. It was a huge unknown at the time because the cancer had spread quite a bit before we caught it. But again, I think one of the things that really, looking back, was such a blessing was that we had a really a great community around us that was able to support us. So my wife was able to organize the finances and keep track of all that stuff, but we had so many friends who were able to take care of our kids when I went to chemo, bring us over meals when we came home from treatments, things along those lines. And just I had so much to live for that I was really lucky. I think everything else was in place. That was the big thing, was the life insurance. But it also played into, right, at 2 and 4, there are some things that you need to start doing for your children, starting to set up 529 plans to plan for their education and things along those lines. And some of those probably also were delayed a little bit, and then it was a few years before 2008, the Great Recession. So there was just a lot of things that happened around that time. In general, I think that was probably the key thing that was missing as far as my planning was concerned.
And for a lot of listeners, I would imagine that their concerns in these kind of situations is not only if something happens to them, not only if something happens even to their immediate family, but a lot of people are caught in situations where they have a responsibility not only for themselves and their immediate family, but maybe also their parents. What would you say, or what advice would you give to that person in terms of maybe conversations they need to be having now, not only within their own family, but maybe with parents?
Yeah. Yeah, Vince, I think that's a great thing to bring up. And again, I think the key for that is being proactive, especially if you have parents who are aging, even in good health still. I'm trying to really advocate for people just being more open about talking intergenerationally as well as with their spouse and their loved ones about finances. And that can come into play if, let's say, again, everyone's situation is different, but if a parent is getting older and has some money saved away for retirement, some of that should be expected to pay for long term care if he or she needs it, or even final expenses. Is there life insurance for that? There's a lot of different things where you can look at, even if there's extra money. We talk a lot about estate planning. So there are tax smart ways to do things, to move things in between generations. And then also the younger generation, or the sandwich generation, can help take care of their parents. And again, it all depends on the specific situations, but it depends on assets and availability. But it's really critical, I think, just to start that conversation. And obviously, everybody's different. So some people are more comfortable talking about money. Some people were raised in an environment where that was taboo and you never talked about money. But it's just like most things in life, talking about it and planning for the eventual situation and the necessity up front will save a lot of hardship and heartache down the road. So I think the easiest way to do it, if people are open, is to have a professional, whether that's a good attorney, a state attorney, or a good financial planner who not only talks about the numbers and cents, but talks about, again, wishes. If you were to pass and you have some money left over, do you want to give money to charity, or do you want to give it to your grandkids or help pay for their education? Everybody's got these different wishes and wills and goals, but to talk about that up front sometimes is so critical and sometimes takes people by surprise. They never knew that was important. So I think getting a professional team, whether it's a CPA, an estate attorney, and a financial planner. And what we do is in the financial planning world is I feel like we are the quarterback. We bring everything together where we discuss all these things, but then we bring in the professionals to draft the will, or we have the CPAs prepare the taxes. But a lot of times we can talk about all of it. And that's my favorite part of engaging clients is sitting down with a couple, for example, and they're in love and they've been married for a long time and they're raising kids and they're great parents, but they may have different outlooks on money, on how their retirement is going to look, or how they spend money, or how comfortable they are. And starting that conversation is gold to me. That's where you're really getting into the heart of the matter and helping them in their relationship, because quite often finances can be a hardship when there's some conflict in the relationship as well. So that's what I enjoy.
Yeah, and just having the conversations and broaching conversations, I was as you were describing the situation with parents, I was just envisioning somebody going home maybe for Thanksgiving, have a nice Thanksgiving dinner, everybody's relaxing, and it's like, Dad, tomorrow I want to bring over my CPA and a CFP, and we're going to talk about preparing for you to die.
There
So
you go. Seats
yeah,
at the table. Yeah,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Exactly.
So just segueing into those conversations, they're the practical things, but there's also getting into the conversation. You're also talking about couples and the whole thing of maybe different, not having the same financial priorities, even within a family or within a couple. The conversations are so important, and it does sound like you get somewhat involved in those. For someone listening who's even struggling with starting the conversation or broaching the conversation, any tips?
Yeah. So again, usually when we see people, it's because of some pain point, and the pain point could be small. So it could be someone is 59 and they want to retire at 62 or 65. So all of a sudden they're within striking distance of retirement, and they realize, you know what? I got to do something to make sure that things are in good shape. So it might be something like that where we have the conversation and then we engage and we have our first conversation. So with the financial planning process is usually many conversations, and it depends again upon the individual situation and time of year and what's important to them. But let's say some a client and a spouse comes in to speak with me about retirement planning. Yeah, we'll talk about the numbers, but I'll start getting into all those other things as well. So even if they didn't come in to talk about estate planning, guess what? We're unfortunately, the secret is we're all going to die, right? And maybe I'm a little bit more comfortable with it because I've come close a couple times, unfortunately. But I'm perfectly comfortable talking with it. My father was too. He planned everything out, not to an odd extent, but just comfortably. Hey, after I'm gone, here's what I want you to do. And he would always preface it with, "Oh, I'm going to live another 50 years, but when I eventually die, here's what I want." So I will initiate those conversations, even if they didn't come to me for that. And it's not going to be doom and gloom or morbid, but the conversation will be like, okay, we're talking about financial planning and retirement planning. That's great. You've got a kid. How old is he or she? 10 years old. Do you have a will? No, we haven't gotten around to that. Let's stop. You got to get around to that. I'll honestly just say you got to get around to that. And what would happen if both of you were to pass in a car crash? It's terrible to think about that, but it possibly could happen. Not only how would your child be able to go to college or put food on the table, but who do you want to take care of that children? Because otherwise it'll automatically be decided by the courts. So it's important to have all those things in line, and sometimes it's uncomfortable, but that's where I come in and have the healthy conversations. And sometimes I am just planting a seed where I'll make a recommendation and they'll say, all right, we'll do it. Yeah, of course we got to take care of it. And then 3 months later, it hasn't been done, but they're thinking about it. And then eventually it gets done because someone's actually broaching the subject, and perhaps the couple has different ideas on who they want to raise their kids if something were to happen. And again, this is only a worst case scenario, and it's not going to happen to the large majority of people, but it does happen. And I never thought that it would happen to me, and it almost happened to me. So it's important to have these conversations and to push a little bit if things aren't in order, and that's what I do in a nice way.
Yeah, and this podcast is specifically for that CFO at home, that if there is someone in the household who is thinking about these things even before a tragedy happens or an emergency happens, it's that person. And there is that challenge of maybe this person is thinking of that, and maybe their spouse or other people in the family are more normal, well-adjusted people who don't think who don't think about catastrophic things just on a bright sunny
Sure.
day. And sometimes that can be the challenge. One person will want to have that conversation when there's not an emergency. The other person is, I don't want to think about that. So what I got out of what you shared there is an interesting way for me to think about it, because I'm always trying to collect little tips as far as starting these conversations. Sometimes life presents opportunities, and it's not that you want to wait. Oh, next time we have a tragedy, that's what I'm going to pounce and have these conversations. But there is something about that. And hopefully, it's a small incident, but sometimes a small incident may open the window to have larger conversation. And sometimes it may not even be you. It may be someone you're close to. And maybe I heard about my coworker who's going through these things, that kind of thing. When it seems like when life naturally presents the opportunities to have the conversations, maybe that person who's been wanting to have the conversation, wanting to have the conversation, and maybe their spouse, their life partner is not open to having that conversation. Maybe it's looking for those opportunities. That's the way my mind works, and that's just how it went. Does that sound plausible, or does that just sound devious? Because sometimes my mind works a little
No,
bit
no,
differently
right.
than how it should.
Yeah, no, I think everybody would be happy just setting it and forgetting it and thinking that everything's working fine and they'll be okay. But I think just like anything, you go in to see a physician once a year. Not everybody does it, but you should, right? Just to get a baseline on your blood work and make sure the cholesterol looks good and that you're in good health. And you walk out and you say, "Hey, I'm doing fine." Obviously, that's the best thing for couples to do as well, to say, "Hey, let's just get a checkup, make sure my life insurance is good and the beneficiaries are up to date, that my investments are working well." And that would be ideal as well. Just do that once a year. But that doesn't always happen, right? But there are reasons that people might want to come in, right? So everybody has to do their taxes. And we're thinking about that this time of year. Everybody's working on taxes. And you probably heard a lot of people think that the wealthy are smart with their strategies and save money on taxes. Well, that's true, and there are a lot of strategies for people of all levels to take advantage of. Sometimes even as simple as a Roth IRA versus a traditional IRA. When do you contribute to what? What should you be looking for? Some people put all their money into traditional IRAs or 401ks and are so excited because they built up this big nest egg for retirement, and they don't realize when they hit 75 they're going to be paying a lot of taxes because they got to start taking those out. So some of those things too, just looking down the line, doing a cash flow analysis, seeing what you can expect in retirement, sometimes that's good to do proactively, because even if everything is going fine and you're making enough money and you're putting money away, you're budgeting okay, sometimes there are ways that you can be more efficient and actually put a lot more money in your pocket for retirement if you make small changes along the way. So even from that perspective, it doesn't have to be a health crisis in order to come in and see a professional.
And your point about taxes is a great one. I was briefly in the tax business, tax preparation business a couple of decades ago. One of the big things that I wanted to the big opportunity that I saw out of that was because even then I was really more wanting to talk with people about more comprehensive planning. But when people want to get their taxes done, they want to get their taxes done. But the great thing about it is, in order to get your taxes done, you're laying your whole financial life, at least the highlights for the previous year, in front of the person who's preparing your taxes. So the opportunities to have discussions about things that have nothing to do with tax preparation, as far as saving for college, or there's certainly saving for your own retirement, there's so much opportunity there. And I didn't stay in the business long enough to do this, but that was my big takeaway. It's like, wow, preparing people's taxes is nice and it's needed, but all of these people who aren't even thinking about these things, when you're looking at all their information, just all these natural questions will come up in my mind. Yeah, I'm supposed to be preparing taxes, but wow, we could have another conversation here. So
Yep.
that's another opportunity. People do their taxes every year.
Yeah.
So that's an opportunity maybe to leverage that into having those deeper conversations that is not like I was saying earlier, not bringing a conversation in after the Thanksgiving dinner, but something
Yeah.
that is very natural. So that's another great tip.
Sure, and CPAs are I've got a great CPA that I work with, and they're just swamped the first quarter of the year, right? Just getting so much prepared and everything in on time. Sometimes they have time to make suggestions, and sometimes it's just making sure everything's right and submitting it and moving forward. And that's why also we work with CPAs and estate attorneys just to look at everything and then to run ideas by them, to brainstorm with everybody so that we can make those strategies and those suggestions. We're able to have more of a long-term engagement with clients year round and bring in even capital gains from their investments and things holistically. So again, that's why I think it's just critical to get a trusted team around you of all these professionals.
So the last thing I wanted to cover today, Gordon, is in looking through some of your material, I also see that you concentrate on helping people through generational wealth transitions. I'm curious, when we say generational wealth in general, the first thing that comes to my mind, at least, is millions of dollars and significant assets that are passing from generation to generation. And is that what you deal with mostly? Or the things that you deal with just financially, do they span a big range? Because as far as generational wealth, if you have millions and millions of dollars, you think, oh, I need to plan for the transfer of all of this. If you don't have as much, you don't think about it as much. So when you help people navigate through these things, is it all across the financial spectrum, or is it more people who have significant assets?
Yeah, it could be anybody. And first of all, when I say generational wealth, I sometimes mean even wisdom, right? So it's passing on things that you've learned over the course of your life. The longer we live, the more experience we've had, and hopefully we can learn from those experience. And again, communicating between generations is such a critical thing, I feel, because sometimes kids listen to their grandparents even more. So if the grandparents can talk about the hardships that they've been through, maybe the grandkids can learn from that as well. But yes, of course, the simple answer is the more assets you have, the more flexibility there is. Just like diversity in general, if you have all your eggs in one basket, that's not the greatest strategy. If you have a lot of diversified investments as well as insurance and things along those lines, you have a lot more tools to pull out of the toolbox. But as far as strategies, it can always come up. So, for example, again, a grandparent could help if he or she has a little bit extra money, and education is important for that grandparent. They can help pay a little bit for the grandkids' college education and pay directly to it without having any issues as far as gifting is concerned or medical issues or things along those lines. Different generations may be at different tax brackets, right? So when you gift different things, whether it's stocks or cash, could make a difference strategically. So there are a lot of different strategies that you can do. Putting obviously when there's a little bit more assets, we talk about putting assets into trust, whether it's cash or a home, and it can avoid probate. And that can be at any level. Obviously, if you don't have many assets at all, you wouldn't use that. But probate could be an expensive and a time consuming effort. So avoiding that sometimes makes sense, even if you have just a few $100,000. So there's a lot of different strategies. Again, it's based upon the individual, not only the individual person, but the individual family and situation and goals. But there's flexibility for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the common denominator that has struck me during our conversation is that there is the practical side of this conversation, but there's also things that, like you said, really don't have anything to do with money, not directly. So when you talk about generational wealth, that's not only money, it's also intangibles in terms of wisdom and things like that. The conversations that you need to have in order to proactively plan for these things, that's not directly financial, but it's a relational thing that also has to be taken care of, getting in a position where you can have those conversations. And even going back to the top and what we were talking about in terms of you find yourself in something unexpected and you haven't planned for it, having a social network to fall back on in those situations, even if you don't have the insurance, even if you haven't done the practical things, just have that social network in your mind. And maybe if you don't have a tight social network, perhaps that's something that you really don't think about in terms of planning. But it almost sounds like those intangibles are as important as the practical things that we've talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, Gordon, I've really appreciated the time today. I do want to talk about the resources that you have to help people continue taking really with the conversation, and also the resources you have to help them go to the next steps and the things that we've talked about here. Tell us a little bit about your online headquarters and the resources that our audience can find there.
Sure, sure. So the main website where you can find me is Haas Wealth Strategies. Haas is my last name, so it's haaswealthstrategies.com. And there are some educational resources as well as ways to contact me there. I also started my own podcast, and it's called Gen Relational Wealth. A little bit of a tongue twister, but along the same lines of what we're talking about here, about how wisdom is passed from generation to generation and how people talk about money and how that affects their daily life. We offer complimentary one on one sessions with people just to get to know each other, to see if it's a good fit, and would love to speak with some of your listeners directly.
All right. And we will have all those links in the show notes. Also, have the links to your socials: Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, all lined up and ready to go. And I'm glad that you talked about your podcast, because that is the unwritten commandment of this podcast. If you have a podcast, you must talk about your podcast. So I think we covered all the bases.
Perfect.
So, Gordon, one more time, I want to thank you for your time. Hopefully, this will provide tips for maybe for people who find themselves in situations, and for those who maybe are in small situations, it'll be the push they need to do preparation for the more significant things that may be coming down the road. Thanks for your time. Thanks for
Thank
being on
you.
CFO at Home today.
Thank you so much, Vince. It's been a real pleasure. I enjoyed it.